When I was a kid, I experienced racism very early on, and it's an irony that I used to pray if I could do anything with my work, it would help us heal those wounds of racism and segregation. A lot of these things have shaped my sensibility about what I do. So a lot of it is not just because I think it's interesting in terms of light and this and that and shadow, which does interest me. But the main overture about the work is about poverty and the marginalization of people and how those spaces affect our whole sense of self in a space. That's been just a part of who I am. This art thing, however you want to describe it, is a huge part of my life. And so I want it to mean something. If I can change the world in any way, it would be to help break down certain social constructs that I think are detrimental to us as human beings, and there are plenty of them. It was really my grandmother that got me interested in it. But my mother was just like not that thrilled about it because she was the first of my grandmother's 4 children to get an education.
But I discouraged it because I didn't think it was any money in art. You know, everybody that I knew was either dead or, somebody else was reaping the benefits. So I tried to encourage him to go into architect or become a teacher, something that he could, draw on in later years, something that he could do in his spare time. But he showed me that he loved art, and he decided even if he couldn't make a living at it, he would still like to draw. My mother was almost a second mother to Dean, and he loved her, really, truly loved her, because she was there with the hands-on raising, and I was able to do the financial part of the family, and that was because I had the education. I had gone to school and was working.
As teacher at Tom Harris, there was 4 of us who were really interested in art, and he introduced us to local art competitions. And so we were often the only black people at these shows with Mr. Harris and his wife, who were Caucasian.
I called it a crucible of competition, which can be good or bad because it puts pressure on kids. He was even as focused then as he is now, but there were so many negatives. A lot of it was the black-white thing. He paints what he wants to paint because he feels the need in here to make a visual statement about what's going on. And that's the strength of Dean Mitchell's painting. Half of his focus and intensity is based on, this is what I'm doing is extremely important, and it's never been done before, and whenever or however, whatever the recognition is, I have to do it my way, which to me is almost a definition of what art is and what art's supposed to be.
Now when I went to art school, that was a whole nother deal because, when you're in a small town and people telling you you're gifted, you have no way of measuring that until you get into a school of the arts. And suddenly you're in a pool from different kids from all over the country, maybe all over the world. And then you start recognizing, oh, maybe I'm not as talented as I thought. And my first year I lost about 60 pounds, almost dropped out. And my grandmother called my mother and said, this boy's lost so much weight. I don't know what that art school is, but I don't think he can go back. I got on the phone with my mother. My mother said, look, I can't take care of you the rest of your life. You're going to figure out what you want to do. I got back on that Greyhound bus and I went back. And I had made a personal choice that I had to put every inch of my soul into this if it was going to work at all. And so that was a huge turning point for me because I heard so much about the art world being, not inviting to people of color. I saw that we were not included in that narrative at all, in that space. And so I had to figure out a way, since race was always coming up, to stabilize myself economically. And the only way I knew how to do that was through the galleries and through competitions. I would enter every show I could possibly enter. And sometimes I would win between $20,000, $30,000 a year just competing. Couldn't hardly sell the work, but I could compete for prize money. And nobody had to know what color I was. I worked out of my basement for years. I drove my same car for 15 years. And I saved my money and I invested it because I needed the freedom to do what I wanted to do. I did not want to pick a side as my junior high school teacher told me, Tom Harris, he told me, he said, "You're very talented, Dean." He said, "But you have a problem." And I said, "What is that, Mr. Harris?" He said, "You want to do what you want to do." He said, "And that doesn't work in American culture." He said, "You got to pick a side." Am I African American? Yes, and I'm proud of it. Am I just going to just talk about black issues? No, because the world is much larger than just black issues. Am I going to talk about poverty? Poverty affects everyone. Death affects everyone, and my work crosses over in all of those areas.
I never thought that he would be able to paint the quality of pictures that he's painting and to sell and to promote and be in business for himself. All of this, he did it himself. He didn't have any help, Of course, I encouraged him. I've traveled a lot of places with him, and I've seen his work be put on exhibits, and I've seen the sales of it, and it's just really boggles your mind to know that he's coming from a very small, humble town like Quincy, Florida, and to the magnitude that he is today.
My name is Matt Cutter. I'm with Cutter & Cutter Fine Art in St. Augustine, Florida, and I'm also a painter. We've got a good track record over 10 years of selling hundreds of paintings from Dean. So I think he's a very strong, worthy artist, and I do think he stops people in their tracks, and it's very contemplative. He's not grabbing you with the brightest color. He's not grabbing you with bells and whistles. He's grabbing you in a different way. He's asking you to come in very slowly, examine what's going on, feel that nuance, and that's what he brings to the table. So if you're 30 feet away, you would say that's realism, and it is. It conveys that emotion. When you look really closely at how he's laid down the watercolor layers, there's a lot of abstraction. There's a lot going on with the design. What he does, he plays with the dark and light, and everything, in my opinion, with Dean's work is keyed in on a strong design that sets up everything for the painting.
Dean Mitchell is beyond that of a master. If you have one where you say, well, this is the apprentice and this is a master, well, the apprentice learns how to do this or that, and then once they're able to demonstrate that, then they say, oh, okay, now you're a master. Dean Mitchell is an enigma. Dean Mitchell was born to do what he does. When I look at Dean Mitchell's work, I do see science, I do see philosophy, I do see religion, because some of those pieces, like Rowena, when you see that particular piece, that is a religious piece, that is an icon, that is an actual Mary that you say, oh my God, she speaks of humanity. Where in the world would someone painting like an Andrew Wyeth, and in some cases better than Andrew Wyeth, come from? And therein, I think, lies the spiritual quality. Because if you look at Dean's background, Dean achieved not because of, but in spite of. In spite of is when God takes place. Therein lies the miracle.
I was raised by my grandmother from 11 months old. And so I was sort of a highly active child. And so I would often walk to town with her, because I grew up in the Panhandle of Florida in a little town called Quincy. And I had no idea of the kind of wealth that was in Quincy, because we basically stayed in the black community. A lot of us, when we first got our first bikes, we would ride over in the area and we would see these huge mansions. And so I began to look at the wealth discrepancy. And I said, how could somebody have a house that big? And really didn't really understand it. But I think through the years, as you become more educated, more socialized, you begin to recognize how you fit into the social structure or the social order of things. And then when Martin Luther King started emerging on the scene, we would watch him on television. So a lot of these things have shaped my sensibility about what I do, because I do a lot of things. A lot of the environments that I do are a window into poverty and a window into that psychological space in which I emerged out of. I will be gone at some point, but what I leave, will it really make the world better in some ways and make us examine our own human behavior toward one another?
He didn't paint to sell. Okay, that sounds ridiculous because he had to make a living. He painted because it's something he had to do and something he had to say.
He wants people to examine this work on a deep level. So I do think he's very important now, and I think his work will be very important 100 years from now.
Vermeer and Dean Mitchell are branches from the same tree. Therefore, Dean should not be seen in terms of a continuation of a Vermeer style, should not be seen in terms of perhaps being in Vermeer's shadow, should not be seen as perhaps standing on Vermeer's shoulders. They should be looked at as branches coming from the same tree, bearing similar kinds of fruit.
I think art has a way of mirroring back to us what we become. And it also provides us history in which we can reflect back on to not keep repeating the same mistakes. It's that kind of troubling world that feeds my passion to try to figure out how to derail some of the destructive behavior.